Hi, welcome to Perp Miniatures. I'm going to be kitbashing a Nurgle flavored Chaos spawn. Originally, I built this for my Necromunda Chaos Helot's gang, and it would definitely work as a warp horror for Necromunda, and with a few small changes could work for Age of Sigmar as well. I started with a body from the Skaven Stormfiends kit, and tested a few different head options. One that I liked was a mix between the Gloomspike Gitz or Ragnarok Spider and using the arm of a Khorne Khorgorath as a lower jaw, but I might reuse that for a Khorne flavored spawn in the future. Ultimately, I landed on a head from the Lord Discordant on Hellstalker from the Chaos Space Marines line. When I started this build, it was because one of my Chaos gang had turned into a spawn, so I wanted it to look like this thing used to be a person. So I chose this head since I thought it looked a bit like when the person started to morph, they threw some sort of hood over its head to keep it under control, almost like horse blinders for the spawn. While working on the head, I checked the connection and started slowly scraping and cutting away at the neck of the body and inside of the head. Partway through, I decided that I didn't want to use the whole body from the Stormfiend and used my hobby saw to cut the body in half at the waist. While I was trimming the connection between the head and the neck, I found this bit from the Ogre Maw Tribe Stonehorn kit and liked the look of it as a lower jaw, but the big tusk parts stuck out too much, so I cut those off with my hobby saw. Then scraped the lower part of the head flat to connect to the jaw there, gluing it into place with some sprue glue. I left the head assembly separate for the time being while I worked on some more of the body, and to get a better feel for how the spawn would look before I glued the head into place. I had the tail of a Daughters of Cain Melusai iron scale in my bits box and thought it could look like one of the Chaos Spawn's arms had become a massive tentacle. I assembled the tail as normal and checked it in a few different orientations on the model, but landed on it resting against the ground since the Melusai tail had a flat section where the normal model sits on its base. I glued the tentacle arm into place using some sprue glue. There was a pretty big gap though, which I'll fill later in the build. I liked the look of these bits from an Ogre Maw Tribe Stonehorn that I thought could look like some sort of hideous wings coming out of the spawn's back. I checked a few spots on the spawn's back for these bone wings to go, and then made some adjustments to the bits by scraping with my X-Acto blade. After I was happy with how the connecting points looked, I drilled holes for pinning and glued the pins into the bone parts. To make the connection point more flat, I clipped away at some straps on the back of the body, scraped the area flat, drilled holes, and glued the bone wings into place. I was starting to get a better feel for how the spawn would be sitting on its base, so I went to attach the head now that I had a better idea of an eye line. I wanted the spawn to look like it was bearing down on some prey in front of it, so it would be looking down slightly. After checking the connection was decent, I drilled holes in both parts and glued them into place, adding in some plastic glue at points where the bits were touching to strengthen the joint and left it to dry. For the spawn's left leg, I took a Beasts of Chaos Bulgor leg and pinned it completely through the foot into the leg, checking it against the torso of the spawn and drilling holes to pin the leg to the body, then gluing it into place. I tested the model on a base so I could make sure the leg was sitting flat and adjusted as needed. Once the glue dried, I had enough of a connection to glue the model down to its base, so I checked the positioning and drilled a hole where the back leg pin could slot in and glued the model to the base. To fill out the back of the spawn, I found a part of a Necromunda Ashwaste Nomad Dustback Hellamite bug and thought it could look cool as some sort of stinger. I glued the tail section to its carapace part as normal, made a few trims to the connection, and glued it to the back of the spawn. I wanted parts of the spawn to show that this abomination had transformed from a person, so to start that look, I grabbed an autogun holding arm from the Kill Team Blooded kit and glued on a skeleton arm from the Oathsworn game Skeleton Infantry kit. Though any skeleton kit could work here, that's just what I had on hand. Once that was dry, I glued the arm onto the spawn as if it were hanging limply down from the body. This left a pretty big gap behind it in the shoulder area, and I wanted to fill that in with another arm to add to the monstrous look of the spawn. To fill in that space, I took a bit from a mutated Ogren from the Kill Team Blooded kit that looked like it had mutated into a big crab claw. The arm is normally a left arm though, and since I was using it for a right arm, I had to make some changes, so I clipped the mutated arm right above the bicep. Then I took a right arm from an Ogre Maw Tribe's Glutton and clipped midway through the bicep. I drilled holes for pinning between the two parts and glued them together. Once the glue dried, I scraped the connection clean. The claw arm didn't sit too well in the space at first, so I trimmed both sides with my X-Acto blade until I was happy with the result and then glued the arm into place. Before moving on, I decided to fill in some of the gaps that were left from previous steps. I mixed up some green stuff and started with the connection of the head to the spawn. First, pushing a glob of green stuff into the gap and then smoothing it out with a sculpting tool, making sure to have some water on the tool to keep it from sticking to the green stuff. I tried to follow some of the shapes from the head to make the connection more organic looking, like following the lines of the lower jaw back into the body. Next, I moved to filling in any gaps on the shoulders, building out some muscle for the claw arm. Then I filled in the tentacle arm. I got a good amount of green stuff down to fill out the space, then with the edge of my sculpting tool, pressed lines into the green stuff to make it look like the scales of the tentacle continued up a bit onto the body, spacing out a few towards the top, a bit removed from the rest to help give the appearance that the scales slowly stopped rather than a harsh line of scales stopping at the shoulder. I wanted to bridge the connection between the upper body and lower body a bit more, so I put some green stuff down on the back and pressed a spine bit from the Age of Sigmar Blades of Khorne Khorgorath to make it look like the spawn's spine was exposed from its mutation. Adding a few strips of green stuff over the spine to show some skin still holding onto the spine. Next, I filled out the rest of the back and filled up some holes from the Dustback Hellamite kit that were for the kit's original legs that wouldn't be used here. To fill in the much bigger gap near the right leg of the spawn, I crumpled up some aluminum foil and pressed it into the cavity of the body with some super glue to keep it in place. Then I covered the aluminum foil with green stuff and smoothed the connections around the body to it. For the right leg, I took a leg from the Flesh Eater Court's Crypt Guard kit and glued a skeleton leg to the back that had a similar pose to look like the bones had ripped out the back of the leg. I used a skeleton leg from the Oathsworn game Skeleton Infantry kit, but again, any skeleton kit could work for this. Once the connection was dry, I took some green stuff and sculpted two small pieces onto the back of the flesh leg with a gap between the two, as if this were where the skeleton leg was ripped from, doing my best to mush a bit of texture in between the two green stuff pieces. Once that dried, I drilled holes for pinning and glued the legs onto the body, with the legs hanging back a bit as if they were mid-run. To add some texture, I dotted some super glue on various parts of the spawn and sprinkled some basing material over top it to give the appearance of a rougher skin in those areas. And with that, the Nurgle Chaos spawn is done. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed your time here, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. See you next time.